Now available in paperback and e-readers. Spellbound, a darker shade of black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. Some people believe that there's a plan to push foundational black Americans out of the cities so that whites and non-blacks can live in the cities and live a so-called better life without foundational black Americans. Now, foundational black Americans have been moving out of cities like New York City for the last 30 years, and some say that there's a plan to try to make these cities mostly white and non-black and make them places like Dubai where the elites can go out here and hang out and so-called have a good time without the presence of black people. Now, this grand plan will basically blow up in the face of the white supremacists because the white supremacists cannot get along without the black dollar. No dollar has the spending power of the black dollar, and it will be the cities that suffer when they push out all of their black residents, because without the foundational black American dollar, the foundation of most of these cities will collapse. Now, most of these cities gained a lot of benefits from foundational black Americans when foundational black Americans began moving to the cities during the period known as the Great Migration. Now, most foundational black Americans moved from the South to the cities in the Great Migration because they were trying to get out from under the oppressive laws of Jim Crow, and they were also looking to get away from the oppressive economics that Jim Crow laws presented to foundational black Americans by making them second-class citizens. And as a large population of foundational black Americans began moving down south, many of those Southerners soon found out that their entire economic base was beginning to erode. And towards the middle of the Great Migration, this is where white supremacists look to implement a terrorism campaign to maintain a codependent relationship with foundational black Americans by looking to try to force black people to not get on the buses and trains that were going to take them up north for better economic opportunity and also give them the freedom and security that they actually wanted to get as related to acquire quality of life. Now, what's happening now in the mid-2000s is that we're starting to see more black people start to migrate from the cities back to the South, and this is something that has been going on since the 1980s with the start of the crack epidemic. Now, during the crack epidemic of the 1980s, many foundational black Americans began moving out of cities like New York City, and they began moving out of the cities like New York City out to get away from the terrorism that many suffered in inner city neighborhoods at the hands of New Jack drug dealers and gangs, and also wanted to get a higher quality of life because we saw more foundational black Americans entering into the middle class. Now, this was the start of the Great Migration from the south, from the north to the south, and this is where a lot of arrogant people who are wealthy up here in places like New York started to believe that they needed to get all of the foundational black Americans out of cities like New York with their plans for so-called gentrification of neighborhoods like Harlem. And as they looked to try to push many foundational black Americans out of neighborhoods that they built like Harlem and Sugar Hill, their plan was to try to price all of the black people out, hoping that there would be wealthier white and non-black people to come to these areas, and hoping that these wealthier white and non-black people would make these places a place for the wealthy, like Dubai, where they could feel comfortable about being white and non-black, and even feel more comfortable participating in their racism in their little fiefdom. However, what's happened over the last 30 years is the same thing that happened in the South. What happened here in places like New York is that this grand plan to try to push all the black people out of the cities is blowing up in their face as we speak, because again, no other dollar has the economic spending power of the black dollar. Now, in order for these cities to be these places that are considered to be tourist attractions, these places need to have a strong tax revenue base. And there is no stronger tax revenue base than foundational black Americans, because foundational black Americans have a direct investment to wherever they live. Whenever a foundational black American spends dollars, their dollars have more spending power than those of the non-blacks that many whites, rich whites, want to go out here and replace the black dollar with. Many of these wealthy people think, oh, we can get rid of black people, but it's black people who are the ones who work and actually pay taxes. And this is the thing that many in the South soon found out when foundational black Americans began leaving the South. There was a huge erosion of tax dollars, and as those tax dollars eroded, what happened was many of those Southerners weren't able to maintain their old Southern tradition without the black dollar there to lay the foundation for it. Because oftentimes with the black taxpayer, because they are in a codependent relationship with many of the whites in the areas they live in, they oftentimes do not demand the tangibles that they deserve as related to the taxes that they pay, as related to their $3.3 trillion in spending power. And because many black people are not economically aware of the political impact of their tax dollars, oftentimes many politicians in both the blue and the red party go out here and take those tax dollars out of black communities and use them to shore up their own white and non-black areas and make those areas have a higher quality of life. And because they take 97% of those black tax dollars and use them to improve the quality of life in their neighborhoods by improving their schools, improving their roads, improving their libraries, improving their municipal services like sewer and water, and improve their law enforcement as related to adding a proportion of police to protect those areas. This is what makes those areas appear to be better areas as related to a quality of life. And this is all done on the black tax dollar from foundational black Americans. However, when those areas wind up losing foundational black Americans, those areas wind up losing a large chunk of tax revenue, and that tax revenue winds up leaving with foundational black Americans who really don't understand their political position as related to economics. And because they don't understand their position as related to economics, many black people don't demand equal services for their tax dollars and don't demand tangibles from their candidates that they vote for as related to getting those tax dollars back to them. And that's where everybody gets the big mistake as related to push about black people. A lot of racists want to say that there is no value in the black dollar, but there is a great value to the black dollar to whatever region that those foundational black Americans live in. Because again, foundational black Americans are a working class of people who not only go out here and get jobs and make money, they also open up black-owned businesses, and both of them create a large tax base for whatever region that they're in. Now, many of these racists in the elite and corporate America want to believe that a non-black dollar is actually worth more than a black dollar. However, that is not shown as related to the balance sheets of America's economy. For example, when we compare the two superhero movies, Black Panther and Blue Beetle, Black Panther and Blue Beetle show us the power of the black dollar versus the power of the non-black dollar. Now, Black Panther, when it came out in 2018, was not expected to be any sort of box office success. However, Black Panther went on to have the biggest opening weekend of any Marvel Cinematic Universe movie out of all the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and went on to become the #1 movie of 2018. And that showed the power of the black dollar as related to making that movie an economic success. Meanwhile, in contrast, many Hispanics complained about Black Panther's success and demanded a Hispanic superhero movie, and Warner Brothers went out here and made a Blue Beetle movie for $100 million, put it in theaters, and advertised it heavily on Hispanic networks. However, the film flopped at the box office and lost over $100 million. And that really showed the difference between the black dollar and the brown dollar, and why the black dollar has great value to any place that it's in. Unfortunately, many black people don't see the value of the black dollar and will go out here and spend 97% of their dollars with whites and non-blacks who do not respect black people or respect the economic spending power of the black dollar. And many municipalities have basically started to take the black dollar for granted and think that they can go out here and do better without the black dollar. But they will soon find what the many cities like New York are finding: when the black population leaves, your tax base basically erodes, and your tax base erodes to the point where you're not able to pay for all of those municipal services as related to basic services for everyone. Moreover, you cannot maintain a high quality of life in those areas that tourists go to, or be able to protect those areas where many of your wealthy live, like the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side, because I have seen from my own eyes many of these areas that were considered to be prime real estate start to deteriorate. And one of the reasons why those areas are deteriorating is because there are no foundational black Americans to go out here and be the foundation that basically shores up a city's economic base. And as these cities start to see their revenue start to decline as they make these campaigns to push black people out, what they do is go out here and participate in cockamamie schemes like congestion pricing here in New York, in an effort to try to go out here and make their areas appear to be more exclusive. However, many of the whites and non-blacks who do not live in places like New York City basically balk at these cockamamie schemes to make these areas appear to be more exclusive, and have no interest in going out here and spending up to $27 to drive their vehicles into areas below 60th Street. No, many of those individuals basically will balk at going to pay these kinds of high prices, and this shows how little value the white and non-black dollar have as related to making these areas exclusive. Because when it comes to the white and non-black dollar, it really has less value than the black dollar, because the white dollar basically is one that while it's flipped over multiple times in their own community, it's not a very loyal dollar. Same thing for the brown and non-black dollar. Many of those dollars are not really loyal to the cities that they stay in. No, when it comes to the brown and non-black dollar, a lot of times that money is not invested into a city. What happens is that many of those individuals, especially if they have entered the country illegally, are sending a lot of their dollars overseas. And every dollar that is sent overseas, what happens to that money is it's not going into the coffers of a city's tax base, and every one of those dollars is taken out of the tax base and sent to another country, further enriching that country from that person's labor. So every dollar that is taken out of a city that isn't spent on goods and services. And again, taxes paid from those goods and services and taxes paid from those wages, those dollars are not going into a city's coffers to enable them to pay for municipal services. Moreover, when it comes to many whites who are in cities, many of them are not residents of that state in some cases or that city. So they are not paying taxes because they are commuting to those areas. And since they are commuting to those areas from places like here in New York, they come to New York from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, even Virginia and New Jersey. All of those people, since they have residence in another city or another state, are paying taxes to these areas like Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And that's where they're paying taxes. And in some cases of these states, they have no taxes at all. So the city winds up losing a lot of revenue as related to the tax base because these individuals aren't paying any taxes for anything at all. So the whole plan to say, oh, we want to get rid of foundational Black Americans is one of the gravest economic mistakes that any municipality could make. And again, cities need money to run, and without black dollars, they don't run very well, because without a black dollar to be a foundation for that area, what happens to those cities is those cities are going to fall apart just like the South did during Jim Crow, because what happened to the South in Jim Crow is as many of those blue politicians wanted to have their smooth world where they didn't want to deal with any negras, what happened was their economic base began to erode to the point where they could not sustain themselves. And this is why they were looking to participate in terror campaigns to try to go out here and pull black people off trains. And as they looked to pull black people off trains to prevent them from being able to have a life at having the freedom and a better economic opportunity for themselves, what they wanted to do was scare black people to remaining into a codependent situation where they would have the power and be able to take their tax dollars and tell them that they needed to live in a second-class status, and tell them that they did not have to have quality schools, quality roads, quality infrastructure like plumbing and electricity, and tell them that they needed to go out here and take second best. But what's happening ever since the 1980s is that black people are starting to say that they want a better quality of life wherever they go. And as black people have become more educated on their value to America and their value as people, they are looking for the best deal. Now, the only thing that black people need to do as related to this situation is start to become politically aware, and that's where guys like Professor Black Truth and Mr. Superboy and many others are coming in and giving black people an education on why they need to go out here and vote for tangibles, or get tangibles in exchange for their vote. And the late David Carroll has tried to tell black people that they need to pick their candidates to ensure that those tangibles are guaranteed to come to us, because election day is supposed to be a payday where you are paid back the taxes that you paid into the system. And for over 100 years or more, most of the black tax dollars have not been paid back to black people, and we are due for a windfall, because we foundational black Americans have been the ones who've been going out here giving whites and non-blacks a higher quality of life at our expense. And as we've given them a higher quality of life by not demanding our tax dollars be given back to us in tangibles such as earmarks and programs that go out here and are made specifically for us, we have gone out here and had our lives made into a lower quality of life. And again, this is where black people need to understand their value to America's economy, because it's the black dollar that allows many of these areas, like here in New York, many of these areas like Midtown Manhattan, to be so affluent, and places like the Upper West Side and the Upper East Side and the Village. That's all due to the dollars of foundational black Americans, as they pay state and city taxes and sales taxes to maintain the city's infrastructure. And when black people are not working, what happens is that entire tax base starts to fall completely apart. And when black people start to move from these areas, especially working class foundational black Americans, what happens is that entire base starts to erode to the point where it is not sustainable, because when it comes to those white dollars, again, many of those people don't live here in New York City to go out here and pay the high taxes. And when it comes to many of those people who are migrants, again, many of those people are working off the books. And when they work off the books, they're not investing in New York's economy. So what they're doing is sending most of their money overseas to be invested overseas. And when it comes to other non-blacks, again, they're not really interested in investing in New York City's quality of life. So a lot of these people, they want to sit there and say, we're going to turn New York City into this playground for the wealthy, but that playground won't be able to sustain itself the same way Neiman Marcus wasn't able to sustain itself when its CEO went out here and said that he didn't want any money from poor people, and the poor people basically took their money away from Neiman Marcus, and Neiman Marcus is now on the brink of bankruptcy. And the big thing with this whole situation is that black people, we need to discover our value and find our value economically to this country, because we have $3.3 trillion in spending power in cash and credit. And that $3.3 trillion of spending power in cash and credit has a lot more economic power than we know. No, a lot of us don't see the value in our spending power wherever we go, because it's the black dollar that enables many communities to live so well. But what we have are a group of racists who think that it can replace the black dollar, and many of them are finding out the hard way that the black dollar was an economic engine. Because if we look at California right now, they've pushed black people out of areas like South Central, and as it turned into South Los Angeles, it doesn't have the same economic base that it previously did. And while they thought, oh, we'll bring in some people to replace black people, those people don't have the spending power that black people did, and that area's quality of life has basically fallen off. That's what I've seen from many of Kid Organic's videos as he talks about Los Angeles. And the areas of places like the Bay. And the whole thing is that many of these people have this grand plan. They think they can live without the black dollar, but it's the black dollar that is the one that lays the foundation for America's economy and lays the foundation for a lot of the spending, because foundational black Americans have a direct investment in America, and foundational black Americans, because we have a direct investment in America because we built America, we want to build a higher quality of life. And while we go out here and try to do this, we get demonized in the mainstream media as being the face of crime, being the face of violence, and that's not the case at all. No, when it comes to most foundational black Americans, we have tremendous economic power, but we don't invest in ourselves, and that's why we really have a real serious problem. We don't invest in our black-owned businesses. We don't invest in going out here and using our dollars to create our political base, where we pick our own candidates to get tangibles back to us. And that's where we have the disconnect as related to the black dollar. And we have a lot of people saying, oh, we don't want black people in cities. Well, you'll soon see how that quality of life in those cities falls completely apart when there are no black people. Because when there are no black people, what will happen is, again, your tax base will not be there, and you won't have any sort of people being loyal to your economic base, because those people are taking black dollars and taking them out of those cities. And in the case of some of those white folks, like the hipsters, they're basically playing in the city to see if it's like Friends, Seinfeld, and Sex and the City before moving out to the suburbs and living their life after they've had their fun. So when I listen to people sit there and try to say, oh, we're going to go out here without black people, well, any place black people go will benefit from the black dollar. But the whole thing is, if black people start to become politically aware, they cannot go out here and foster codependent relationships with black people where they don't go out here and settle for less. And if black people started demanding more of their money, what would happen is that there would be a major revolution in this country, because as black people start to demand tangibles and demand a higher quality of life for their dollar, what happens is they have to give us our money because we did pay those taxes, and we paid those taxes, but we never asked for that money back. And it's time that more black people started demanding their due, because if other countries like the Ukraine can get money, if other people like migrants who are entering the country illegally can get money, then black people should be able to get tangible services and tangibles for all of the money that they invested in this country. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive fiction on my black-owned SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel The Thetas, or my vampire novel Eternal Night, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, and support a black business person trying to improve the quality of life in his community by clicking the link in the description box and purchasing some of those books. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today. Support black-owned and black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.